Welcome to Wemcast with myself, Eoin Walker, critical care paramedic and trauma lead for World Extreme Medicine. So today's podcast is focused on the world's toughest race that is airing currently on Amazon Prime, and also to which I was extremely fortunate to be involved with as part of the WEM medical cover for the event. So the race itself encompassed trekking by foot, travelling in various non-motorised forms of transportation, including paddling, sailing in an outrigger, paddleboarding, mountain biking, whitewater rafting, rappelling, climbing, canyoneering, and Bilibili rafting. That's 10 domains of discipline with only a map and compass to navigate through these various terrains. So these terrains encompassed an ocean leg, sailing and paddling in an outrigger for 40 miles, a jungle leg covering almost 100 kilometers in three sections, a river leg that started with 63 kilometers of biking, followed by 30 kilometers of whitewater rafting, and then a jungle trek, a highland leg where teams trek through the jungle to the base of Vua Falls, then climbing 1,000 feet, and then swimming 9 kilometers through a series of cold pools, and then an island leg, which was a 77-kilometer mountain bike, then a stand-up paddleboard, finally a 45-kilometer journey with an outrigger to finish on Manor Island. So this was an amazing experience to see this firsthand and to see 66 teams battling the elements in the island. So what better way to regale and to recollect this event than with the only UK team that raced in Fiji with Joe Selby. So Joe, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much. Wow, what an introduction. That brought chills. That really did. What a great introduction. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. I'm good. Currently based in Cairo, so it's very different weather to the English climate. But Joe, so just looking at your past, and looking at the fact you've raced all over the world, was this your toughest race to date, or have you raced tougher?
I certainly think for me it was the toughest race I've done. Yeah, the sheer length of it, the different disciplines, the unknown elements. All in all, when you add it up together, it was the toughest race I've ever done.
And so, just looking at your background before we kick off with really the race itself, because it was such an intricate race over 466 miles, which is just amazing, really. But so, am I right in thinking you work very much in the city? You used to work in Canary Wharf, but how different is that terrain to where you are now?
Um, I would say very different. I think in my application, I said I was hoping to swap the concrete jungle of London for the jungles of Fiji, and it certainly was. When you get out into these racing environments, it's certainly very different to what you've got at home. Very much, I'm an office worker, so to speak. So spend my 9 to 5 working in the office, and then try and spend my 5 to 9 adventuring in weird and wonderful places, either around the UK or, when I'm lucky enough, around the world.
That's fantastic, Joe. So where else in the world have you done some of these adventure races?
So I've raced throughout Europe, France, all throughout the UK, Spain. I've done similar races, although not adventure races through Europe. I've done other adventure races in places like South Africa, Ecuador, China, other non-adventure races in, the States, Japan, Singapore. So I certainly do feel fortunate to have had the opportunity to take part in such races all over the globe. It's a wonderful way to travel, a wonderful way to see different parts of the world.
That's fantastic. So, I mean, being there last year with yourself and the UK team, it was fantastic just to see the interaction of different teams and different nations sort of coming together. And how was it for you? Sort of, did you get on or speak to or make new friends with various teams from across the world?
Yeah, so one of the most amazing parts of the race was the fact that it was such a diverse competitor group. There were teams there from over 30 countries, And look, I'm not an Olympian. I've never been to the Olympics, but I imagine the, you know, when I went into the resort in the days before the race, there's flags there from countries all over the world. I imagine it kind of had that very much Olympic village type feel. It was amazing meeting people, like-minded folk from all over the world. Wonderful.
That's fantastic. So, just digging down into some of the details. So, having been at the start and watched the start of the race, which was on an outrigger, and you were paddling or sailing sort of 40 miles over to Overlau Island. How was that start for you? Because there was certainly a frenetic kind of activity from the start, from my perspective.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think if I was to sum up the start in a word, I would say chaos. It was pure, unadulterated chaos. So you've got 66 teams. We're putting these kamikaze canoes, these traditional Fijian boats, which had been built specifically for the show. So none of the teams had really had any experience in these boats apart from, an hour tutorial in terms of how to raise the sail, how to steer them, how to upright them if they ever tip over. And then you've got 66 teams, highly energized individuals, all wanting to get stuck into this race, a race that we've been looking forward to for months. The conch goes from the start. You realize these 66 teams are on a river, can't be more than 50 meters wide. And it was chaos. There was boats bashing into each other. There was boats flipping over. And we as a team were just trying to, navigate this, stay out of trouble, because it really could have been possible for races to be ruined before they'd even really got 50 meters down the track, with um, boats making nasty marks in the hulls of other boats and that sort of thing. And then again, the adrenaline's pumping. From memory, we've got something like a 10-kilometer paddle out in the open ocean, into the open ocean. At that point, we're hoping that it's when we can put the sail up, sail over to the first checkpoint, sail onto the other island. But there was just no wind that day. So, we're in a hot Fijian day, no wind at all, out on the ocean, basically paddling for the whole day. And I think it was at that point we realised what sort of a race we were into. Things weren't going to go as we expected, things weren't going to go as planned.
So, just looking and just watching the Amazon Prime documentary, some of the teams got to Overlau Island and really started to acutely fatigue. How did you feel when you got to Overlau from that first outrigger journey?
I mean, I suppose we'd raced quite conservatively to that point, knowing that it was going to be hot, knowing that we're fair English roses who aren't really used to such extreme sun, such extreme heat. So, we made sure that we were regularly drinking, eating throughout that first leg. So, look, it was a tough day. We did get to the island, and there were certainly signs of fatigue, but nowhere near the levels of, you see the likes of a US team bend racing and one of their individuals getting into, difficulty with heat stroke. So we were somewhat fortunate. I think we had raced conservatively to that point.
Yeah, indeed, and I think that was probably prudent because, like you said, from a consistency and longevity perspective, you definitely had to conserve your energy, because if I'm right in thinking, there was a trek around the island and then you had to come back to the mainland, which in itself wasn't easy. Did you do that sail or paddle back to the mainland overnight, or was that in the day?
So we started it in the evening and then effectively overnight back to the island where we needed to dive down to pick up the medallion and then paddle back to the mainland. So most of that paddle was done throughout the night.
Gosh. So Joe, just looking at the team in a little bit more detail. So you had Kevin Stevens, who was your team captain, Natalie Long, Tim Stevens,
Yep.
yourself, and then you had Jill Watson, who was the sort of the tactical support, making up the UK team. Did you know each other prior to racing?
Yeah, so Kev and I have raced together quite a bit before, but never in long expedition races, more in 1 to 2 day mountain marathons, that sort of event. So for us, it was the first time racing together in such an event. Kev has raced before with Tim and with Natalie in expedition length races. So I was very much the newbie onto the team, a bit of a ringer, but yeah, hadn't raced with these guys before. And then, Jill's our tack. You can never underestimate the job that the assistant crew do in terms of organising us at camps, making sure we've got whatever we need. It was very much a 5-person team rather than the 4 of us, an assistant. Very much a 5-person team. Jill, very experienced racer herself, and I think it was good for us having someone who could show both sides. She'd raced before, but also supported before, so kind of knew what we were going through. But in terms of us as a team, Natalie is based in Canada. So actually, the first time I'd met Natalie was maybe 3 days before the race. Obviously, with technology nowadays, we've been able to speak quite a bit, and we kind of, we know that we've both done this sort of thing before. So you're going into that race with confidence that the other person has the experience, has the ability to do what they're there to do. But it certainly is quite interesting going into an event like that with someone who you don't necessarily know that well. But all in all, it worked out very well.
Fantastic. So, Joe, just looking at the planning phase, and how much did you plan for the world's toughest race, and would you have done anything different in the planning phase?
I think the planning phase probably lasted about 6 or 7 months, and in that time, a lot of what we were doing changed. So, the information we got right at the start was very limited. We didn't really know what sort of disciplines there would be, or certainly not the length of disciplines. Um, so there was a lot of planning that needed to go into getting the right kit, and also getting that kit over to Fiji. Um, Nutrition is obviously a really important part of any sort of race, but there were some quite strict guidelines of what could be imported into Fiji. So we needed to spend quite a bit of time planning in terms of how we might be able to get our nutrition out there, shipping it out beforehand, because we knew we wouldn't be able to take it with us in our bags. Um, there's a lot of certifications that we had to do. So we had to get certificates in the climbing disciplines, the whitewater, swift work as well, and all of those things can take time. We also had to get signed off for the medical side of things. 2 people had to get signed off for that. Fortunately, we had guys like yourself as backup, because I really don't think my 16-hour first aid course would have covered anywhere near the likes of some of the things that you saw other teams experience on that. But yeah, I mean, there is obviously a lot of planning that goes into this, both for the event itself, but also for the team. And I think in hindsight, what we probably would have done as a team differently is try to bring a lot of that planning earlier than we did. So do the certificates early, get that out of the way, get the admin stuff out of the way, so that it leaves for the evenings, for weekends close to the race, for building up that training.
That's fantastic, Joe. Absolutely, absolutely. So I remember seeing you and having a candid conversation with you at checkpoint 22, where you'd just been racing through the night through these cold pools. It was the highland section, and everyone was freezing cold. You and your team members were freezing cold, but actually, I do just remember surprisingly you being really quite chipper, quite, you were really positive still, and there was some really good team spirit there. I think the key was at that checkpoint, you really get out of the cold clothes quite quickly. and get into warm clothes. And I remember sort of sharing out about 2 or 3 a.m. in the morning, sharing a cup of coffee with you, just talking about how the climb was and how the swim was through the through the pools. From your perspective, what were the lowest points of the race?
I think there are probably 2 points in the race that really stand out as being quite low for me personally. So the first one, it was, you mentioned earlier on the river section, there was a 60, 70 kilometer mountain bike in the lead up to the whitewater rafting. And so the whitewater rafting had a dark zone. What a dark zone is it means the course is closed in the hours of darkness, because obviously you can't have teams hurtling down rapids in the middle of the night. So we knew that the whitewater rafting stage was going to close overnight. We knew that in order to clear it before being hit by the dark zone, we'd need to get there by, I think it was around 2 o'clock in the afternoon, we'd need to be there. We'd set off on the mountain bike with, we'd planned it. We'd set off on the mountain bike with plenty of time, and we were hurtling through this mountain bike, not a care in the world, loving the scenery of Fiji, loving the local villages, really enjoying the race. 17 kilometers from the end of that mountain bike, we hit what I can only describe as a mud festival. It was suddenly, you're there trying to cycle through thick, claggy, sticky mud, and as a team, we know we've got this cut off to try and hit so we don't get dark zone, and we can just see it slipping further and further away from us. And you know, uh, a stage where we may be expected to finish at midday, 1 o'clock in the afternoon, we actually didn't finish till after dark at 7 o'clock at night, which meant, we got hit by this dark zone, which meant, instead of getting through the rapids, we had to camp before them. And you just, yeah, that realization as you see that kind of goal slipping away from you, and finally when it's gone, and still knowing that you've got however many more kilometers of carrying your bike through this mud, falling over, dropping your bike. It was a bit of a low moment. It's one of those times where, um, if there was a car saying, "Hey guys, why don't you leave your bikes there? Drop out of the race and come and join us now." The temptation would have been quite high. But I think the good thing with all these things is you're never able to drop out of the races in these parts, because you've got to get through them. The only way to get out of that mud was to continue pushing the bike, carrying the bike, trekking to get to the end of it. And look, the more you move, the quicker you'll get to that end point. But that was certainly one of the low points. The second low point was just before the waterfall section. So there was quite a technical trek before we got to the bottom of a waterfall. And for those who've watched the series on Amazon, it's the area that Bend Racing got lost in. It's the area that Eastwind, the Japanese team, got lost in, and effectively we got lost ourselves. And I won't mention how lost we got, because I want to spare our team's blushes, really. But let's just say, in adventure racing, when you make a mistake, when you make an error, you're not talking and you're not counting errors in terms of seconds and minutes. You're certainly counting errors in terms of multiple hours. So, we got lost in this section, lost a lot of time there. And yeah, got quite cold as a team. Whenever you're spending longer in a section than you expect, it means, that food starts to run low. So that was certainly another moment. But the good thing with adventure racing is you're often not too far after a low moment from a high, and certainly finding that waterfall and ascending that waterfall. We managed to hit it just at sunrise. Ascending that waterfall at sunrise, seeing, the sun come up over Fiji, seeing the whole island of Fiji kind of spread out in front of us. It it was by far and away the best experience I've ever had on a race. And you think, well, if we'd had a perfect race up to that point and hadn't had any errors during the navigation to get to that waterfall, we probably would have hit that section in the dark, and then you wouldn't have had that experience. And likewise, one of the tough parts of a race was, as you say, jumping through those cold pools of water after the climb of a waterfall. And again, it was tough for us. We got cold. I wouldn't have wanted to do that at night. And again, if we hadn't had that, navigation error earlier, we would have been doing that section at night, and it would have been even harder for us as a team. So, you've got to take the rough with the smooth in these sorts of things, and also, the good thing is there's a team of on the court. There's a team of 4 in the camps. There's a team of 5 of you. You're there to kind of really bring each other up. With a team of 4, it's unlikely that you're all feeling low at the same point, so you can help each other out. You can maybe carry a bit of each other's weight. You can, tow each other on the bikes, tow each other on the treks, help each other through those low moments to make sure as a team you're moving as fast as efficiently as possible. Although I must admit, I think when we got lost on the trek and when we hit that mud section, it was a low moment for the whole team. It wasn't just one of us feeling low.
Yeah, looking at that mud section just from the footage on Amazon Prime, it looked absolutely horrendous. It looked super tricky. But just fast forward, Joe, because I know you yourself and or indeed the team, just even towards the finish. So there was real poles of pathology, really. So there was a lot of hypothermia and a lot of cold people at checkpoint 22 and 23. But there was a lot of hyperthermia actually down at the sea level. And just as you were coming into finish, did you struggle with any hypothermia?
Yeah, thanks for raising that. So, I mean, I must admit, from a personal note, a little bit embarrassing, but yeah. So that final outrigger section out to Manor Island. So we'd done the first section the evening before, and then once again got dark zoned on the island overnight, and then did the last section the next morning. And so we would have started at 6 a.m. and it was probably a section which lasted, my guess, 4 hours, something like that. That final paddle, and we weren't looking after ourselves as well as we were on the first paddle on the first day. Weren't drinking as much as we probably had. By this time, we've got 9-10 days of exhaustion, 9-10 days of cumulative effort on the body. And yeah, I'd had a few stomach issues for a couple of days beforehand as well. So my body would have been dehydrated, hadn't drunk enough, finished, had the elation of finishing, and then I went into the medical tent and just asked for a glass of water and a diarrhea, and it was basically, they probably saw how grey I looked. You'll know far better than me, but the signs of heat stroke, the signs of that in a person, and said, full credit to the medic on the day, who basically said, look, why don't you come and take a seat over here? And I'm like, no, I'm fine. I just need a little glass of water. I'll be fine. Look, you're here anyway. Just have a seat. Let me take your temperature. And took my temperature, and it was, I think, 39.7 degrees or something like that. And after that, they laid me down, put ice on me. So my race very much finished in the medical tent rather than sipping champagne as we'd maybe been planning for the past 24 hours when the finish line started to come into sight.
Absolutely. Well, to be fair, Joe, I think there was a lot of fatigue, and like you said, it was the attrition of the arduousness on the body over that duration of time. So I don't think you were the only one to be so acutely fatigued in that moment. But just panning back slightly and looking at the disciplines, the 10 domains of disciplines. Was there any discipline that you guys struggle with the most? So we know that there was this Bilibiliing, which was just a very much an indigenous rafting, which I think was a new domain to everybody. But was there any one domain of discipline that you guys struggle with as a team?
I mean, I think as a team, we're not the strongest paddlers, so that was always going to be a struggle. And then if you look at the volume of paddling, particularly at the start of a race, that was a struggle for us as a team. We'd never trained together in things like the outrigger or the kamikaw, and they're disciplines where team teams can really come together, with the timing of paddling and that sort of thing. So I think that's an area that we struggled with, certainly the paddling side, over and above other teams. But Bilibili rafting was, I think I went through every single emotion on that Bilibili raft. So, it wasn't a stage that you look at and you think, oh, that's going to be particularly tough. But we didn't know about the Bilibili rafting before the race. We had an idea because it had been included in the Eco Challenge when it was last held in Fiji. So as a team, we'd worked out that if we were going to do Bilibili rafting, this is how we'd build it. These were the knots we were going to use. So we'd at least kind of thought about that. One thing we hadn't necessarily thought about was how we were going to move these Bilibili rafts. So you get down to these Bilibili rafts, and we tried every possible way to get these rafts to move faster than they were doing. We were standing up, doing the kind of windmill type paddling. We were sat down trying to use normal paddling. We stopped at the side of a river, cut down new bamboo, and used the machete we had to try and fashion kayak style paddles. No matter what we did, it didn't work. We were not moving any faster at all. It was just going to be one of those legs where you just needed to get your head down, keep paddling, and hope that the end would come soon enough. But my arms were just burning coming off that Bilibili raft. It was, yeah, it was quite the stage.
Absolutely. So anyone who's not familiar with, and certainly I wasn't familiar with Bilibili rafting, you're right. It's a cross section of bamboo poles, which are then tied together with a selection of knots, and then another bamboo pole for the actual paddle itself, isn't it? So it's a selection of poles, and then you're paddling with the pole, which seems in itself quite counterintuitive, and it just looked very difficult for all involved, really. And just even lashing them together seemed really difficult, because if they come apart on the river, that's that section of the race over. So I can imagine it was very challenging. So Joe, just looking at your highest point, you mentioned climbing up the waterfall at sunrise and just looking over Fiji, and just really sort of surveying the land, and just you know just appreciating how far away you are from the UK, from your office job, from the concrete jungle. Was that one of the highest points for you, or was there any other high points in the race?
I think it can sometimes be difficult in a race to enjoy the moments, because you're sometimes wanting those stages to be over. You start the race and you're like, right, we need to get through the paddling, because then we can get to the trek, and then we need to get through to the trek so that we can then get on the next stage. Then we need to get through that so we can get on the stand-up paddleboarding. And I think it's important as a racer to kind of step back at times and kind of realize what an environment you're in and the reason you're doing it, because as you'll have seen from the show, they took us through some absolutely incredible places. Having that opportunity to paddle those the Kamakaw canoes out into the ocean, past all these tropical islands. It's incredible. We raced the outrigger at the end at sunset out of Fiji. So you're racing this outrigger on the ocean, the sun setting behind you. Just some incredible experiences. And I think it is important to take that step back and take those moments to actually enjoy what you're doing and not kind of get into race mode almost, and I want this to be over.
Yeah, absolutely, Joe. Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. So if you had your time again, would you have done anything differently in the race?
I, I mean, look, it's a race that spent. We were on course for 9-10 days. So as you look back, there's always going to be moments where you think, "Oh, I wish we'd done this differently. I wish we'd, not made the mistake there." Um, there's only the top teams have perfect races, and even then, they'll be looking back at it and thinking, you know what, we could have saved an hour or two here if we'd done this differently. I think the one thing I would change is maybe we should have pushed before that whitewater rafting section to find those extra couple of hours in the course to mean we could have done that whitewater rafting section before getting dark zone. But look, in all honesty, we had a good race. We completed the course. I don't think you can be too disappointed. And there's always going to be more races to do. There's always going to be times to correct the navigation errors, correct the error of your ways. So yeah.
Absolutely. So, Joe, just as we're coming into land on the conversation, is there any advice you'd give to teams that might be preparing to do the world's toughest race again in the future? And then there's the second question on the back of that is are you considering a potential entry into next year's world's toughest race?
Yeah, so second question first. Yes, we put another entry in. We'd absolutely love to be out there in Patagonia, racing there. And if not that, we've also entered another couple of adventure races once COVID kind of allows people to travel again, in the hope that we can at least get a few expedition races in next year. In terms of advice for people wanting to get into either adventure racing or indeed do World Suffers race, the only advice I can give is just do it. Get out there and do it. Like it truly is a fantastic sport, taking you to wonderful places around the world, and um, it can feel daunting if you haven't raced for that long before. The truth is, though, you'll never know whether you can do it or not without trying it. So the advice is just to throw caution to the wind, jump in there and give it a go. In terms of specific advice for World's Toughest Race for anyone lucky enough to get in, I'd say I'd go back to a comment I made earlier and say just try and get all the admin stuff done as soon as possible. Do get the certificates out of the way, work out what kit you want to take, and try and move that admin stuff, because it's amazing how much admin is involved in getting 5 people to the start line. Try and do it early so you can leave that time for training. As you get closer to the event.
Absolutely, absolutely. So one thing I realised when I was out there looking at all the teams, and I think the UK, the GB team raced with this kit was it the Hyperlight kit? So very much
Yes,
lightweight
yeah.
rucksacks, lightweight kit to trying to minimise weight.
Yeah, so look, when you're trekking for those sorts of distances, you're doing those sorts of distances, weight obviously becomes very important. But actually, more important than weight is having the right kit. You know, you need to be able to prepare for any scenario. You don't want to be getting hypothermic or hyper or hypothermia on the races. So you want to be taking enough stuff with you. You want to have enough water for you. You want to have enough food. You want to have enough layers. So if the temperatures do drop, you can put on fresh clothes. So weight is certainly important, but more important, I feel, is having the right equipment with you so that you're not going to get into difficulties on a race.
Absolutely. And just one of my final revelations as we come into Lanzhou, from your perspective, because I saw this a lot from the medical tent, was how important is it to look after your feet?
It's the number one thing, I think, for a race of that sort of distance, looking after the feet. We certainly, on the treks, we stopped a number of times to kind of wash our feet, clean our feet, put you know medicate the feet. It's the first thing we did in the camp whenever we arrived. Look after your feet. It's the last thing we did before we left the camp. Sort your feet out. For the next stage, I'd say, I probably spent more time looking after my feet than any other part of the body during that stage. And even then, towards the end of it, we were starting to get signs of the dreaded jungle rot in our feet. And that was despite the amount of time we spent trying to look after them during the race.
Yeah, absolutely, Joe. I one of the things that one of my revelations was just that meticulous foot care, and that you had to be meticulous about hygiene because and just trying to keep your feet as dry as possible because over the longevity of the race. So looking at your race, Joe, I mean, you came in at 208 hours and 24 minutes, finishing in 22nd place. But so that's an extremely long period of time to be almost constantly on the go. Grabbing a couple of hours sleep here or there. But did so having that meticulous self care over that duration is almost a requirement to almost just be able to complete the race. Did was that the case across your team members? Did everyone in the team have that meticulous foot care and or self care?
Yeah, so we very much took those sorts of decisions as a team. Everyone in on our team had raced these sorts of races before, and particularly knowing the environment we're racing in, knowing how important foot care was, we would make sure that as a team we were looking out for each other and looking out for people drinking, looking out for people eating, but in particular looking out and making sure we were all looking after our feet. Um, Sorting them out in camps when we got there, stopping as a team to address foot care issues as soon as they would arise. It's so important that you do think as a team in these sorts of events. Because look, three of you could have absolutely perfect feet. If one of you has issues with feet, then that could be the game. That could be the race over for all of you because it's very difficult to carry someone for 670 kilometers.
Absolutely, and like you said, it really notions towards how much of a team event it is, really, because it's almost not your ability to take care of your own feet or your own health; it's your ability to make sure everyone is doing so, because you're only as strong as your weakest member. Absolutely. So coming into land, the final question, Joe, just as we finish, how was just looking back at the whole experience? How if you could sort of summarize it, how was it for you and the team?
I mean, I think I've used this adjective a few times in the course of our discussion, and I'd like to find a better one to use, but the one I land on is unbelievable. It the race itself, the event itself, was so well done, so well planned. Having all those teams from across the globe, meeting wonderful people who both races, but also the local communities within Fiji were also welcoming, so happy. Um, that opportunity to race in these places across those oceans, up those rivers, over those highlands, places that you wouldn't get to see as a tourist, were just, yeah. I run out of superlatives. I run out of adjectives when trying to describe it. It's just by far and away the best racing experience I've ever had.
That's fantastic, Joe. Listen, I really appreciate your time today and just your perspectives, because they're really unique. You know, you're the only GB team there representing the UK, and it was just not only fantastic to see you racing, but just to see that you guys finished. You know, you finished 22nd. It was a fantastic time and place to finish, and just completing the world's toughest race itself. So, yeah, it was just a real privilege to see you guys race.
Thank you very much. Well, I mean, look, certainly we wouldn't have been there, or certainly I, wouldn't have been able to finish without the support of, the medical teams and stuff like that. So, the things that you guys do is it, it allows these sorts of events to not only take place, but it actually allows competitors to complete them. The filming never goes into how many people would have been in those medical tents, in those camps, having blisters looked at, having little rashes looked at, having cuts kind of seen to so that they didn't become infected, and without that medical support, and not just it's not just the medical support, it's actually the knowledge of the medics seeing the issues before they become serious. You know, I felt it from a personal level, and as a team, we felt it as well. In terms of the little bits of care that were given to us throughout the race, and we certainly wouldn't have been able to do it. So, keep doing what you're doing, keep spreading the knowledge, spreading awareness, and hope to see you out either with you racing or with you behind the medical team at some event in the future.
Absolutely, Joe. Listen, absolutely. I hope to be there with you guys in Patagonia, taking care of more feet, but also certainly cheering on the GB team. So, listen, it's been a pleasure, Joe, and thanks for your time today.
Thanks so much, Aaron. Really appreciate it.